lot more expensive to
Oh
source
yeah.
sort of sustainably and local rather than, so I guess, how did you get around that? How did you wrap your head around the fact that, this is important for me, so I'm going to do it, but it's going to cost me a heck of a lot more?
Yeah, I just kind of, about something I'm really passionate about, and I feel like it wasn't really being authentic as like as me. Like I didn't really feel like the stuff I was making was kind of being authentically like me. It was kind of just like just making for the sake of it. Whereas I really wanted to kind of show, like I feel like it's easier to work when you've got something you're passionate about, and it really shines through a lot easier than just kind of like going through the motions. So I kind of just went through, and obviously I had to like raise my prices quite a bit, which is I was probably undercharging anyway, because as every small business owner, when you're starting out, you kind of really undercharge where you're starting from.
Yeah, and I think the thing to remember, I think sometimes, I don't know if this maybe delves into imposter syndrome a little bit or what it is, but it is scary to put your prices up or value yourself at a sustainable rate that you can actually keep living off of your business and keep growing your business. But I guess the reality of it is people that care about this stuff are willing to pay more. Like I know that I could get stuff cheaper if I went to, not to just rag on Primark, but that's like the cheapest shop I know. So I know that I could go there and buy like a whole wardrobe, bags and shoes and everything for, I don't know, hardly anything. Or I could buy a few key pieces from makers like yourself who really care about this stuff. But the pieces that I buy from you are going to last me a lot longer. Ethically, I feel a lot better about buying them. I like shopping small anyways, as I think a lot of small business owners, that's really important to them. So even though you have to raise your prices for things like this, there's a market for that. And people that share your values are probably quite happy to pay a higher price, knowing the quality, the sort of sustainability and the longevity. As you say, like your bags aren't going to fall apart in 2 months like a cheap one will. So moving on from there, then the next thing that you said was kind of a core value for you would be the connection. So you spoke about, the work to kind of land in nature and that whole tie-in and trying to encourage people to get outdoors. So how did you incorporate some of that value or those ideas into what you do?
Well, I'm kind of naturally outdoorsy anyway. Like we used to do a lot of rock climbing before the pandemic. So something I'm hoping to get back into once things start lifting a wee bit. But so just kind of like I kind of take a lot of my color palette inspiration from like the landscape. Like my latest collection that I released back in September, it was all really inspired by like the Cairngorm Plateau. So it was all kind of like browns and kind of greens, like grays and stuff, all the different kind of colors of the hillside and the landscape. So I kind of tend to use the kind of natural inspiration as like kind of color palettes, and then I kind of try and use like an outdoorsy inspiration to kind of inform like the actual like design and shape of the product as well, and like the usefulness.
I definitely see that in your work. Like you definitely get that real feel for I don't even know if it's heather or what it is, but you just get that kind of that terrain, all the different colorings that go on there. So, and I think you always photograph your bags as well. Not always, but you often photograph your bags outdoors, which I think is really nice, because obviously you can see that was not only the inspiration, but a great place to make use of them. So how did you sort of show that outdoor inspiration? Like, did you just kind of decide early on that everything you do is going to be very nature focused and nature inspired, or how did you bring that sort of love of the outdoors into the brand?
I don't even think I've ever thought about it like that. I think it's just something that's just kind of happened really organically, actually. It's just kind of, I just find it as like a place that's so inspiring to me, and like just kind of there's a kind of limitless amount of inspiration outdoors. As soon as you go outside, it's like, even during like the pandemic when I've been stuck in the city, it's been really inspiring seeing like just like tiny little things, like even like noticing the different like shifts in the seasons of all the different like plants that are like coming up at each time at a different time of year, like seeing like all the different like the blossoms right now and like the daffodils and stuff, and then just kind of noticing like the kind of patterns in nature.
Yeah, and I think you're right, especially during the pandemic. That was like, that was a bit of solace. Like that was the only kind of, because I'm the same. Like, I mean, you're in Aberdeen, I'm in Glasgow, and I'm in a very densely populated part of Glasgow. Like I'm in Finniston, so I'm about as dense as it's going to get. And I think like just being able to get outdoors. And yes, I really miss going to quiet outdoor places because, you know, it's not quite the same. But you're right. You kind of notice the subtle things, like even finding a quiet place to sit by the river and things like that, and just sit and listen to like the river flowing and the birds chirping, and like not have anybody around for a few minutes made all the difference.
I think you learn to appreciate it more as well, because you're so used to just kind of like, there's always people. So when you find that little bit of solitude, it's quite nice to kind of like grab hold of it and like really appreciate it.
It's interesting when you're talking because, you know, I know you've made conscious decisions, like especially in sourcing your materials and things like that, but it sounds to me like a lot of your brand values came to you quite organically. You know, they were things that you already cared about as a person. And maybe that's why you've been able to fit them so naturally into your brand, is because these weren't things that you just pulled out of thin air and went, oh, I think people care about that, so I'm going to stick that into my kind of brand identity. These are things that you cared about a long time before you were a business owner, and they're part of your personal life as well. So
yeah, all kind of fit together. I mean, like, I spend most of my time like working, so it kind of made sense to just do something I was really passionate about, and kind of it makes it feel less like work, and it's more just like fun, although it is work, but it just feels fun.
No, I know what you mean. And it's interesting because like when I was setting up my business as well, I had done like when I did my studies, it was kind of, you did different sections on like communications and public relations and advertising and journalism. And I know that if I was doing this kind of work for larger companies, even kind of like medium to large size companies, I could charge a heck of a lot more. But it's not the kind of work that I like to do. Like, I'm not interested in corporate kind of work. It's not, to me, it's always been about supporting like independent. So, and for me, like that just makes sense because that's a part of my life. Like we try and buy as much independent as we can. We live in a neighborhood where it's all indie cafes and no chain restaurants and things like that. So I think when you build your business around things that you already care about, you're right, it is more fun because you're not pretending to be something you're not, or you're not buying into something you don't believe in.
And it's just exhausting trying to like tend to be someone else as well.
No, you're so right. Like, you know, most of the work that I did before I went off on my own was kind of for nonprofits and arts organizations. I didn't do anything super corporate, but most of the nonprofits I worked for had a board, and they were always made up of like very corporate, like bankers and lawyers and people like that, who were all lovely. And it was great that they volunteered their time. But I just, you know, I remember just feeling so out of sorts, like trying to speak to a room full of people like that, as compared to now, like chatting to people like yourself. I feel like you just get it. It's, I don't know, it's, what you said, it's still work, but it's a lot more fun this way.
Yeah, definitely.
So the other value that we haven't spoken about yet is making with purpose. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Cool. So yeah, it's kind of like, I think it's a value I've had for a while, but I've never really been able to kind of like pin it down. Like I find sometimes like pinning down like the words that your values are is quite difficult. But I just kind of feel like it kind of ties into like the slow craft and kind of slow fashion kind of aspect as well a wee bit. But like making with purpose is just kind of like making things that people need, as opposed to just like making for the sake of making, and just adding like more kind of potential like waste to kind of like landfill and stuff. If you're making something that people want and people need, then it's going to get used, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's still something people want, but it actually has more of a purpose, I guess, than just like, I want another handbag for a night out or whatever. And it makes sense too, because you come from that background, you were really into climbing and stuff. You have a good idea of what kind of, well, even just being a sort of outdoorsy person, like, I bought a bag from you, and one of the things that I loved about it was the size of it, because when I'm going out, I've always got a camera bag on one shoulder anyways, but I want to be able to have like a lunch and a water bottle and room for all of this stuff. And I feel like
a notebook and stuff.
Exactly. And you've really thought that out, even like the pockets and the design of the bags and things like that. So that makes sense that you've kind of really kept that front and center. It's interesting what you said too about how you didn't really know how to pinpoint it, because I think for a lot of people, actually, like, they know what their brand values are. And if you got them to start talking about their business, it would become quite clear what's important to them. But it can be really hard to actually like pinpoint them down into 3 or 4 or 5 main values.
Yeah, it took me a while. It kind of had like a general, like, I don't know if it's an idea or a thought about what, like an overall arching kind of thought or theme of what they were, and it's trying to pin them down. I kind of just sat and was like, what is important to me? I was like, okay, it's this, and then trying to like make them like sound like a value, just rather than like, I want to make things last longer kind of thing. It was like longevity.
So I'm kind of putting you on the spot here. So if you need to stop and think about it, go ahead. But did you kind of say to yourself, right, I'm going to sit down and try and really pinpoint my values? Or did it happen a little bit more organically in that you kind of just went, oh, right, that's really important to me. I'm going to kind of find a way to word that.
I think I did sit down and kind of really think about it. It seems like a wee evening, and I'd kind of like been thinking about it quite a lot of like what my values were, kind of over like kind of like January time through lockdown. I was kind of having a wee think and just trying to rebrand my website and like make it a wee bit more up to date as well. So it's the perfect time to sit down and really pinpoint what's important. So yeah, I kind of had the overarching kind of theme of what I thought they were, and then I just kind of sat and kind of really looked into kind of like, getting them right down and kind of like picking out which were the most important to me.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it is really interesting to me, this idea of like, I think a lot of people struggle to write down, like to create a really formal like brand identity or business plan or things like this, because we're always thinking about these things as business owners. And you probably always have this running through your head, all of these things in the background kind of just constantly, but it's actually like spending a day, an afternoon, an evening, whenever your kind of creative brain works the best. I'm definitely an evening thinker as well, but just to sit down even with like paper and a notepad and start jotting stuff down. And even if it takes a few days of these kind of brainstorming sessions, or if you need to work with someone who will prompt you with questions or whatever the sort of whatever kind of works for you, it's so important to actually get that stuff down on paper, because if you don't understand who your brand is, I think it's really difficult to then communicate it to your audience.
Yeah, it's so weird. Like as soon as I put them on paper, I was like, that makes sense. Which I didn't think that would happen, but it kind of was like that light bulb moment. I was like, oh, why have I not done this before?
Well, and it's interesting too, because I think like, I know for me, I listen to tons of podcasts. I like to read as well. So I read like a lot of articles and books about business, and I'll think to myself, right, I should really sit down and like, for example, I'm rubbish at goal planning. Like I kind of know in my head things that I want to achieve, but I'm really bad at actually like writing it down into steps or creating a plan. And I listen to all these podcasts and I'll be like, right, when I get home, I'm going to sit down with a notebook and I'm going to write mine down, because I'm usually out walking when I listen to them. And then somehow it never happens. I come home and I've got emails to answer, or so I'm trying to be better. That's like my 2021 thing. Like I need to make time once a month, even if it's like an afternoon a month, to just sit and do big picture stuff, because it is important. And you're right. Once you write it down, you've got it. Like that's you. And you can always go back and edit it and change it. Like you were saying, you're going through a rebrand, so you're kind of changing your website and things like that. But I don't know why it's so hard to pinpoint these things.
I think we're just not used to talking about them. You're just kind of used to like, I don't know, like big high street shops and stuff. Like you as a small business owner, you kind of look at like big shops to see like as a kind of like, this is what they're doing, this is what they've done for years. But they don't really have that kind of like those brand values the same, I don't feel. Whereas like a lot of small businesses, it's really like personal. I think it is quite important to just kind of make sure you're doing something that's like really personally you're passionate about as well, and it's important to you.
Yeah, and it kind of sets you apart from other businesses as well, because you're right, big brands, like everybody knows who they are already. Not that they don't need to do like marketing and advertising, of course they do, but it's different. Whereas with a small business, I think people do expect it to be personal. And I don't know, I think people are also more inclined to buy from like-minded people. So if I'm someone who really cares about the environment, if I'm really outdoorsy, if I really care about the slow fashion movement, and then I see your bags and I'm like, those are lovely, and then I go read up on your company, I'm like, oh, she believes in all the same things I believe in. I'm way more invested in your business already than if I didn't see anything about what you care about. And it was just like, I'm Laura, I make these lovely bags. Like there's a big difference between the two, you know?
Yeah.
It just adds a kind of another dimension to it. And it makes it, you know, obviously as any business, we have to sell. Like if we didn't sell anything, we wouldn't have a business, but it makes it less just about like, here, buy my stuff. And like, these are the carefully chosen materials that went into making this. And, you know, it adds that extra kind of, I don't know what the right word is, dimension to it, I guess.
And connection, I guess, as well, because it kind of connects you with like the maker as well, which I quite like.
Yeah, because that's the thing with small businesses. Like, you know, I know that you and I have spoken about this before, and I think it's kind of a hot topic among small business owners, but it's people want to buy from people when you're not a well-known brand yet. Like, I don't know, like these high street shops, as you're saying, like people want to know who they're buying from, and we're more likely to buy from somebody who we feel is relatable to us or who believes in the things we believe in. So, yeah, I think you're right. Connection is a really key part of it. So, how important do you think then brand values are in kind of growing a business or establishing a strong brand?